our next speaker is Kea Zhang. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well done.
Kea is head of product and UX at Teston, a startup building a tool that takes all the hassle out of localized user testing. Sounds like a pitch. But what you're going to talk about is how to make tailored OKR process that actually works for your company. And I believe that to be deeply relevant for any size and shape of company.
Definitely.
So I'm looking forward to this. So take it away.
Thank you. Right. So my name is Kea, and I'm the head of product and UX at Teston. So for those of you who haven't heard of Teston before, we are building a digital tool for localized user testing. And we are a startup, so we're a very small company. I've been working for Teston for about a year and a half now, a bit over a year and a half. But I still remember when I first started. I was laying low, just kind of observing how things were being done, trying to understand this new context that I was in. And there were a few things that I noticed. So first of all, I noticed that our CEO was calling the shots. So he sometimes would come out of a customer meeting, go straight over to the development team, pick someone, and say something along the lines of, I need you to start building this new feature now. And of course that was frustrating for them, but they actually did it. So they would drop what they were working on and start working on this new thing. The second thing I noticed was that there was no real alignment across the team. There were no real discussions around what was the most important thing for us to focus on and what was the most important thing for us to solve. And there was no structure in place for even having these conversations. And of course, that meant that priorities were changing every week and sometimes every day. And that in turn led to a lack of focus, which of course led to a lack of progress. And you can probably imagine my reaction. So after a few weeks of this, I was ready to kind of give up. But obviously, I'm still working for Teston, so something changed. A year and a half later, we're actually setting priorities. So we're deciding what's important to work on and also what's not important, and we're sticking to it. Everyone is actually aligned across the whole company. Everyone knows what the product team is focusing on. The team gets to focus, so the product team, they also know what to say no to on the few occasions that people do actually approach them about other things. And finally, we're setting high, ambitious, lofty goals, which also helps us speed up delivery. So how did we get here? I mean, you know I'm here to talk about OKRs, so you're probably expecting me to tell you that the recipe for success is OKRs. But before we dive into that, I just want to talk you through what OKRs are for those of you who are new to this concept. So OKRs, this term stands for objectives and key results. And objectives, they tell you where you want to go. So it's typically a qualitative, lofty goal. An example might be nail the value proposition on the homepage. The key results, they tell you how you know that you're getting there. They tell you how you're going to meet the objective, and they're quantitative, measurable goals. So again, examples might be reduce bounce rate of homepage below 40%. Another example could be achieve 3% click rate on the main call to action. So in this case, these key results tell you how you're going to meet the overall objective of nailing the value proposition on the homepage. And OKRs, they contribute to a lot of great things, especially related to the problems that I was addressing earlier. So first of all, it helps you with focus. It helps you decide what's most important. What do you do and not do as a team or a company? It helps you align, puts everyone on the same page, working towards the same goals. It helps with transparency because OKRs are supposed to be visible across the whole company. And finally, it helps you accelerate because OKRs are supposed to be really ambitious goals, like they're supposed to be moonshots. So even when you fail, you're going to make a lot of progress. And then, of course, it is also really trendy. So over the last few years, a lot of people have been picking this framework up. Here's just a handful of all the companies that are using it. Even here in Oslo, lots of companies are using it, big and small. It's popular with corporates as well as startups. So you might be thinking at this point, okay, if it comes with all these amazing benefits and all of the big successful companies are doing it, why don't we just adopt this framework and everything will be like unicorns and rainbows? Well, I hate to break your bubble, but that never really works in reality. There's no one method or framework that's going to help you solve all your problems. So if there's anything you take away from my talk today, it's not that OKRs are the recipe for success. It's that you need to be flexible, adaptable, and prepared to iterate and improve no matter what method you're using or adopting. But I am here to talk about OKRs today, so I will be sharing my learnings from tailoring the OKR process to our needs and test on, and hopefully that will help you be flexible when you adopt OKRs. Or if you're already using OKRs, maybe it can help you figure out how to make OKRs work better for you. So I have 4 steps for you today. And firstly, we're going to look at the starting small. So what's typically recommended, if you Google OKRs or read books on it, typically, they talk about having OKRs across the whole company. So you start off with these big company OKRs that feed into these department level OKRs, which then trickle down into team level OKRs, which influence individual OKRs. And my reaction to this is this is a lot of work. You are committing to a lot, especially if you're only just trying out this framework. So at TestOn, actually, we don't do most of these things. We don't have company-level OKRs. We're a very small team, so we don't have departments, so we also don't have department-level OKRs. We do have team OKRs, but only for the product team. So our marketing team, sales team, customer success team, they set goals, but not with the OKR framework. And finally, we don't do individual OKRs because personally, we don't believe in individual goal setting on that level because that sets your team up for focusing on individual goals at the expense of team level goals. And what we want to communicate to our team is that we either succeed or fail as a team. What I'm really trying to say here is don't bite off more than you can chew. It's so much better to start small. If you're introducing this, so much better to just pick 1 or 2 teams, allow them to try it, see if it even works for you, and get some results. Figure out what it is that's working and what's not, get experience, and then once you have those concrete results, if it is working, then you're ready to champion it. And at this point, you're going to be so much more believable as well because you have those concrete results. And those teams, they can go out to the rest of the company and also teach this framework. So what you're really doing here is reducing risk of adopting a big new framework. You're also reducing your workload, especially when you're not even sure if it's going to work for you in the first place. And finally, you're increasing the chance of success with this new method. My next point is all about the focus on continuously improving your OKR process. So typically, it's recommended to try OKRs for at least 2 cycles, I would say 3, before deciding whether or not to scrap it or continue with it. Now, what do I mean with a cycle? So, you have an OKR period. At the beginning of the OKR period, you start off by actually setting your objectives and key results. Throughout the OKR period, you check in on progress on those OKRs. And finally, at the end of the OKR period, you score yourself in terms of progress on those goals. So 3 cycles is basically 3 of those. That might look like a lot, but yeah, it takes time to get it right. And you really want to increase your chance of success by making sure to gather feedback after each period. So after every single cycle, you're gathering feedback on the OKR process. And you want to focus on what worked well, what could be improved, what to stop, continue, and start doing. In addition to this, you also want to review whether it's actually bringing value to your team. So looking back at those documented benefits that I mentioned earlier, is it actually helping you with focus and alignment and transparency and acceleration? Because if it's not, or God forbid, if it's making things worse, then it's so much better just to drop it. And this never stops. This should be a key part of your continuous improvement process. And at TestOn, we still make changes and tweaks to our OKR process after every single cycle. So every single OKR period, we make improvements. My third point is about setting the right cadence. So typically what's recommended is that a single OKR period is a quarter long. I say scratch that. Pick a period that works for you. And the reason I say that is because when one OKR period is a quarter long, then it'll take you 3 OKR periods, 3 quarters, 9 months. That's a long time. Like for a startup, it's ages, but like even for a big company, that's forever to just try out a framework. Now, if your OKR periods are just 1 month long, you could be running 3 cycles within a single quarter. Or like we do at Teston, we actually started off with 6-week OKR periods, and within 4.5 months, we'd run through 3 cycles. My point here is be flexible with your cadence. Like try different periods out, see what works for you. Now you're probably wondering, okay, well, how do I set the right cadence? I have a few tips for you. So first of all, it's about your level of experience with OKRs. If you're not very experienced with OKRs, it's much better to set as short a cadence as possible so that you can learn and iterate faster. But it's also related to how autonomous your teams are. So if you have teams working with lots of dependencies to other teams, then they probably can't get things done as quickly. And that means that you should probably set a longer cadence. And finally, it depends on your domain and industry. So, if it's really slow moving, then again, you probably need to have longer OKR periods. So a concrete example from Teston, we started out with 6 weeks. We then moved on to 8 weeks, which is what we've been operating with for, the last year or so. And starting next year, we're going to be starting with trying quarterly OKR periods. And I really want to emphasize the word try, because if that doesn't work for us, we're going to revert back to 8 weeks. So really, don't be afraid of shaking things up and making those changes and trying things out. My final point is about committing to as few OKRs as possible. So again, when you look up resources on OKRs, typically what's recommended is 3 to 5 objectives and max 5 key results per objective. Now that looks pretty straightforward, looks pretty okay, but if we actually make the calculations here, up to 5 objectives, up to 5 key results per objective, that's 25 key results. That's a lot. Can your team remember 25 key results? I can hardly remember 3 things. So if your team can't remember it, you've probably got too many goals in there. So I really, really recommend limiting the number of OKRs. And that number that you end up on, it'll depend on things like your cadence. So if you have a shorter OKR cadence, you'll probably need to limit to fewer OKRs. If you have a bigger team size, you probably have room for more OKRs. And finally, it's also related to things like team composition. So if you have a more junior leading team, then maybe they need more support, and maybe that'll affect delivery speed. And so that probably means that you should have fewer OKRs again. Whatever number you pick should provide your team with real focus. And you can check in with them, right? You can just ask them, is this number helping you provide focus? So at Teston, right now, what we have is max 3 objectives for any one OKR period, and max 6 key results across those 3 objectives. And this is a number that we've arrived at with trial and error. So we actually used to have 3 objectives, 9 key results, but we found that that wasn't providing enough focus. And 6 is working for us now. All right, so those were the 4 steps of making OKRs work for you. And this is especially important if you're just starting out with OKRs or if you're curious about trying it. I think these are really important points to think about. But of course, I could spend all day talking about it, and there are lots of other facets to OKRs. And I did also prepare some bonus material for you. So these are things that are especially important if you've been using OKRs for a little while, and these are things that can really make or break them, whether the framework actually is successful in your team and in your company. So first of all, you need to secure the right level of involvement. And the challenge here is engaging your team and getting them excited about OKRs and giving them a feeling of ownership towards the OKRs without over-engaging. Because let's face it, I'm a process geek, and I really enjoy this sort of thing, but most people kind of hate process. And in addition, most people don't like change. And so when you're introducing a new OKR framework like this, which is quite heavy and cumbersome, you're going to face some resistance. And people are going to be wondering, okay, I'm learning all this extra stuff and putting all this extra work into understanding OKRs and setting OKRs, what's the point? Is it worth it? And I have a tip for you here. So what's typically recommended is that you just involve the leadership in setting objectives, and then you involve the doers, so people on the ground who are actually doing the actual work. So for example, it could be developers or UXers. They are the ones who set the key results. That means that leaders, they get to come in and like set the direction, influence strategy, whereas the people who are actually doing the work, they get to feel ownership in terms of figuring out how to execute on the strategy. So in Teston, for example, first of all, we work in teams to set our OKRs. So we have the development team, UX team, sales, customer support and success, and then we have an OKR leads team. This leads team is basically leadership plus key representatives from the rest of the teams. And then in terms of actually setting the OKRs, we start with objectives, and actually, I set the objectives alone. But I don't do it in a vacuum. So first of all, I get development estimates from our developers, and that's just based on things that might be coming up, understanding the effort involved in building those things. I check in with our customer success and support and sales teams about all of the customer and user feedback that we've been getting through support channels and meetings. And finally, last but not least, I get input from every single person in the company through a mandatory survey. So every single person has a say. And this is really important for us in Teston because we are really product-driven as a company, and everyone really cares about the product. So this is a way to ensure that everyone has a voice in terms of our objectives. So then I go away, I draft the objectives, and we do a review. But initially, the review is not with everyone in the company. It's just with the leads team because they care the most about the objectives, and they need to be happy with objectives before we move on to any key results. And what I want to point out here is actually, well, first of all, this is a process we've arrived at through iteration and figuring out what needs to improve and so on. But actually, most of the workload is on me. But it's still structured in a way where the objectives that I draft on my own are based on input from everyone in the company. So assuming that the leads are happy with objectives, we can then move on to setting the key results. At this point, we, of course, first review the objectives with the UX and development team so that they understand what those objectives mean. And at this point, there's a revision opportunity, but assuming everything's okay, we move on to drafting the key results. And here, again, it's only involving the UX and development teams. They're the only ones involved in drafting the key results for the product. And they get to decide how we execute on those objectives. But after that, again, we do a full review with everyone in the company. So again, everyone has a say, everyone can give input and feedback, and again, we can revise them if need be, and finally, we document. So our goals here are, first of all, to engage everyone and to build a sense of ownership towards the key results and OKRs in general, while ensuring that different people in the company give input on the things that they care about while making good use of everyone's time and reducing the hassle involved of working with OKRs and reducing all of the unnecessary meetings. So I want to ask you to think about how you can best engage your team and stakeholders in a timely and efficient way, like what that process might look like for you. My last point is that it's so important to show that you care about OKRs. And this is really a no-brainer because what's the point in doing it? Yeah, if no one cares. If no one's asking about OKR progress, no one's checking in, your team will catch on and it'll feel kind of pointless. It is a lot of work after all. So what I really recommend is make OKRs matter for your company. Like it's not enough for leadership to say, I want you to do this. Like show that you care, show that it matters. I have some concrete examples from Teston. So what we've done is integrate it into our existing communication processes. For example, we update our progress on OKRs every 2 weeks in the product team after our retro, so every sprint. And that sheet is available to everyone in the company. We have a fixed time slot in our monthly all hands that's dedicated to updating on progress on OKRs. We report on OKRs and progress in our monthly investor updates. And finally, we also review OKR progress as a company after each OKR period. And this is before we even set new OKRs. And it's not just about understanding how we can improve our process. It's very much also about celebrating our successes. So what we're really doing here is we're showing that OKRs matter to us, to our leadership, our company, and our investors, and that makes it worthwhile. All right, so to summarize, in order to make OKRs work for you, start small with just a few teams, try it out, get results, and then champion it. Make sure to continuously improve your OKR cycle and your process. Set the right cadence, be flexible, don't be afraid to change it up. Commit to as few OKRs as possible. And then once you have all of the above in place, make sure to also secure the right level of involvement from your team and your stakeholders. And finally, show that you care about OKRs. So we've only really scratched the surface here. And as I mentioned, I could talk about this all day. But feel free to approach me afterwards or message me. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Kea. I won't forget questions, so think about if you have any. I have one.
Okay.
Yeah. I was just wondering, you talk about the periods for the OKR periods, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, or quarterly. But then you also describe the process of where you start setting the objectives, you involve people, there's up to the leads, they revise. How long does that process take itself?
Oh, that's a great question.
It could look like a very timely or time-consuming thing. So,
yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, your aim should be make it as short as possible, like set it as quickly as possible. And actually, when Teston was really small, like when I first started and when we first introduced OKRs, I would just book everyone in the team for a whole afternoon, and we would do a massive workshop all together. But of course, that doesn't scale, which is why we've ended up with this process now. And this typically takes no longer than 2 weeks. Of course, you can try to make it even faster, and that I would really recommend doing it as quickly as possible. But our period, or our setting process takes about 2 weeks right now. And obviously, if you schedule it in advance, it could definitely be tighter. Yeah.
Okay, so if I was a white male above 50 sitting in the back of the room running a big corporation, I would be thinking, okay, so she spends 2 weeks setting the goals, and then I'm going to revise them after 6. So what does it mean to a company at scale, and what is the alternative? Because you say that you make them matter, make OKRs matter, but what's really the alternative way of applying strategy to product in a very efficient way?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, honestly, there's a reason why we're using OKRs right now.
Right.
I think so far, in terms of the different frameworks that I've experienced and worked with, this is one of the best. But there are so many other ways. Like, there's so many ways, I think, of combining, like, for example, you could combine Scrum or Kanban with OKRs. There's lots of different ways of doing that. I was just talking to Natalie, actually, who just spoke yesterday, and we were talking about OKRs, and they only do company-level OKRs, and then they have a backlog that they work on and update across the year, and they only do the company OKRs on a yearly level. So I think it's about understanding what your team prefers and what the different options are for your company and like what existing processes you have, and then figuring out from there. But there are so many different methods, so I feel like it's a little bit difficult to cover.
Whatever makes the boat go faster, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have one question first there and then you.
Sure.
I don't know where the mic is, but you have a strong baritone. Can you raise up?
Fantastic.
How fragile is OKR? And I want to ask you about this because it's not an unusual scene. It's not an unusual scene that the top level, the top management of the company goes into a room, and things happen around in the world, and things change, and suddenly they come out of the room all together, very excited because something has happened. They have to react. And I've seen this kind of scenarios since we are talking about this kind of processes and putting stones on the road and deviating the attention and so on. So I would like to know how fragile is OKR, and the second part of the question is how can you do it more, or how can you do it as resilient as possible?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I would say that the more rigid you are with your OKRs, which is the opposite of what I was trying to say, like do not be rigid, but the more rigid you are, the more fragile it is. Like the more you're like, okay, let's just do it by the book and only do it by the book, the more it'll just break down and it won't work for you. Because, for example, like in the case that you're mentioning, like typically, like you will know if you're the sort of company or in this sort of space where things are changing all the time. So for us, that's why when we first adopted OKRs, I knew right away we could not commit to quarterly OKRs. It would not work for us. I knew that things would come up where we would have to change course. And then at that point, like, why are you even setting the OKRs if you're gonna be changing course midway through an OKR period? I used to work for Schibsted. We also used OKRs there. It didn't work very well. But for example, in Schibsted, things didn't really change course. It was very rare that something massive happened where like, oh my God, we need to change right away. We need to change our goals. So there, actually quarterly, the cadence itself worked pretty well. So I think like, as a product person or whoever it is that's introducing this OKR framework, you need to really know your company, know the space you're operating in, know your team, and then set, the cadence and like the OKR limit and all of that based on that. And that's what's going to build resilience. But I think also being really straightforward and honest with your team and saying, this is probably not going to work. Like, we're probably going to fail a few times. We're going to try this for 3 cycles. If it doesn't work, we're going to scrap it. And being honest and transparent about that also really, really helps. Yeah. And then obviously reviewing and gathering feedback, again, that's going to help build resilience over time.
Thank you. There's a question over there.
Hi, I have a question in regards to setting the KRs, or the key results. Often it's quite easy to agree on like 3-4 focus areas as your objectives. Mm-hmm. But I think this probably relates to earlier stage products where maybe a little bit akin to Teston. It's not like you have Google search, you can establish, you have your metrics in place, you have an existing users, you can kind of predict how certain things will affect metrics. But if you're in an earlier stage product, you're entering a new market, you don't fully know who your customers are or how certain product changes will impact, or like how will you necessarily, what are the key results that will drive those objectives? So often when we've dabbled with this, what we end up doing, okay, we have a more, let's say, a gut feel that this is the right product decision to make. It'll probably affect quite a few different key metrics in terms of new users, in terms of engagement, but it's much safer. Let's put the key result as launch this product, launch this feature.
Yeah.
Which I kind of feel is not necessarily expedient within the framework.
No.
So that's the context. The question then is, could you explain how within Teston, specifically around the KRs, what are good KRs that you guys have set, and what are maybe less in your retrospectives that you found actually this wasn't such a good key result?
Yeah, that's a great question. Oh my gosh. I feel like this is like this talk, but like next level. Because actually when I sat down to write this talk, there were so many different things that I could fit in, and that was one of them. So I think, first of all, the reality is what you're supposed to do is set metrics-based key results, right? But that's not always going to be possible because of the things you said. Like, you don't always know what the impact will be after launch. Even if you do tons of user research, you don't know the real impact, and sometimes it's really hard to predict. So that's one thing. I would say, first of all, it's okay to set that sort of key results where it's more task-based, like launch X feature. But secondly, I think it is related to like what data you're already gathering, and like you need to really make sure that you do a lot of user research and that you look at the customer feedback, and that is going to help you set better metrics-based results. And related to that, when you do set metrics-based results, I think it's so important that you focus on leading indicators rather than lagging indicators. So like a lagging indicator might be, okay, let's launch this feature, like launch feature X and increase, activation by 5%. Now that's a lagging indicator because by the time you've launched it, you need some time for people to even discover this new feature and start using it. Like, it's going to take time for them to even to see the impact, basically. It's hard to say what a leading indicator for that example might be, but I guess it's kind of like if you take a sales example, it's a leading indicator would be number of inbounds versus number of closed contracts being the lagging indicator. So as much as possible, focusing on leading indicators. And I think for Teston, what we've realized is sometimes we have to set task-based OKRs, and that's okay. And also that sometimes the lagging indicators just don't work, even though they're really, really powerful in the OKR framework. And I think that's also a flexibility thing, like understanding what works for you. And that's also related to things like cadence. Again, if you have a longer cadence, a longer OKR period, then you're going to be able to put in more lagging indicators because you have more time to work with. So then you could say launch feature by the middle of this OKR period and see an effect by the end of this OKR period, for example.
Thank you. We're deep now.